Edison Blake, our next reader, spent his earliest years larking about in a dog pen built by his doting father in the backyard of their tiny house. After a while, the realization that he would have to go to school if they expected him to be housebroken led to enrollment in a succession of parochial, public, and private schools, none of which was able to provide a cure. Fortunately, he learned to read. Even more fortunately, at a formative age, someone gave him a pencil and a few scraps of only slightly used paper. He has been, ever since, doggedly scribbling lines, one word after another, with the same honest terror and attention to detail that guides a tightrope artist walking the line one foot after the other. Now, a technologist, musician, and writer living in Wisconsin, he tends his own garden and revels in being a family man. His novel, The Original Artificial Stud, is available at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. And by the way, it's also available here tonight. Edison has copies to sell for $12, so visit him afterwards. His latest flash fiction pieces are currently up online at pureslush.com, and his recently completed novel, Undead Vikings in Love, will be available soon. Please welcome Edison Blake.
The original artificial stud takes place in the future, though it's a future not unlike today, or last Tuesday, if Tuesday was a particularly bad day, and the world was run by corrupt politicians and ruled by corporate greed. Some cope and some don't. Some cope by latching on to new and exciting ways to escape the dreary madness of everyday life. One such escape is death dancing. Suicide doesn't feel so bad when accompanied by a jazzy show tune and some fancy footwork. The whole death dancer thing started with Jamie Falcon screaming at his synthesizer. "Oh man," he shrieked, "I just ain't getting it." To illustrate his frustration, he smashed his hands down on the keyboard, sending out through a bank of amplifiers a deep, guttural scream that pawed its way up the walls and pounded on the thick glass, separating Jamie Falcon in the midst of another gothic tantrum from the recording engineer. Bates, the engineer, heard silence, his headphone volume set to 0. He looked down across the mixing board. The input meters flared red, stuck at maximum, registering pure distortion at incredibly high volumes. "I can see you're not getting it, Falk," he said in his dry voice, booming into the studio. Jamie Falcon went on playing for another 10 minutes, slapping and hammering the keys to create bone-crunching waves of noise. He was late with his album. In fact, he didn't have a single track laid down. In fact, every song he'd come up with since he'd finished his 8th album, which, like the preceding 7, had been hailed as an artistic triumph by his followers and a commercial triumph by the recording company executives, was garbage. Things had changed. He had accidentally fallen in love, and in the accident, his heart had gotten run over by a feral woman who struck with all the passion of a psychotic 18-wheeler. His manager, Freak Dog, a trusted brother from the streets, from the mean days before stardom, had taken off with every loose dollar he could suck from Jamie Falcon Empire, Inc. He'd left Jamie broke, living off advances paid against his next album. Knowing Jamie hated crowds and public performances, as a parting shot, Freak Dog had also left Jamie contractually bound to perform 9 live netcast concerts in the next 12 months. Jamie Falcon had risen from small-time crime to big-time musician and street poet in 3 short years. He commanded legions of rabid fans who hailed him as the Earth's first true genius. At the start, Jamie declined the title, but he quickly shed humility as he draped himself in cloaks of gold. Pushed by adoring followers, he climbed the heady heights, rising from pop star to cultural icon to demigod. His beat-heavy, trance-induced musical expressions inspired a fanaticism that eclipsed religious fervor in his followers. And now, he just wasn't getting it anymore. Jamie Falcon ground to a halt, slumped on the keyboard. The instrument continued to sob out visceral moans. The room throbbed. Slowly, he reached over and thumbed the touchpad, shutting off the synth. Utter quiet clapped down on him. He sat immobilized by heavy chains of silence. Jamie, the engineer Bates spoke softly into his microphone. Jamie, if you feel like a break. I'm broken! Jamie leaped up. I'm broken, Bates, and you know all about it. He shouted toward the man behind the glass, passing judgment on me, judging everything I do here. You ain't no God. You know you ain't no God. We both know you ain't no God, but you sitting there judging me, putting me through hell, down to hell, you juking me. Jamie began to pace back and forth. It was a very short circuit he made, the length of the keyboard. He dashed, he paced, he swayed from side to side, shuttling back and forth, less than a cage length, twisting, twitching, moaning. Bates! He shook his fist at the glass. Bates! He gave the engineer the finger. In his booth, with the monitor set so low, Jamie's voice was barely a hiss. Bates watched. He hadn't been there at the start, but he had joined when the corporate executives saw the money in bringing on a major engineering talent. Bates was one of the best in the business. It was even more than business now. In the making of the last 6 albums with this man, he had come as close as any human would to being a friend, though on this night, at this time, he found himself asking whether madmen had friends. Jamie stopped pacing. His eyes glazed over, the recording devices still running. His voice was hoarse on the playback. It's a nearly unrecognizable growl. Hey, Bates, what are we doing here? What are we doing if it don't matter? He said. Why we doing it? He waved his arms across his face as if chasing the thought away. He powered up the keyboard. He turned the volume down to a faint trace and sent several notes in a minor key shivering into the air. Bates leaned forward to watch. His face illuminated by the light from the control panel before him, he looked troubled. A gleam of something other than sweat glistened on his sharp cheekbones. Jamie looked up, sensing what he could not see. Now not the time for emotion, he said. You paid to be an engineer. You're paid to engineer things, Bates. So we engineer things. I'm going to work you hard, bitch. It was a solo session. A lone madman, one hand reaching back to reclaim all that had been burned out of him, one hand reaching forward, groping to discover some purpose in the future. He had always been obsessive, driven to play, to be a player, to write something meaningful, to do something. It was a heroic and pointless struggle, in the way that many heroic struggles are pointless. A man dies standing up against overwhelming forces in the direct line of fire, unbowed, defending with his life and blood a line in the sand. A hero whose violated body will be sanctified by the tears of a grateful nation, and whose mutilated corpse will be decorated with medals. Even as the war machine rolls over him, other machines are stamping out the medals. Even as the medals are being stamped out with the revered faces of ancient politicians, other politicians are meeting. The disputed boundaries are being redrawn. The patch of earth enriched and ennobled with the blood of the enshrined hero is ceded to the enemy in the name of peace. And in the name of peace, the fields are planted, and green wheat springs from the ground, hallowed and made fertile by the red blood of a hero. And the wheat that grows there, nodding and gold-crowned in the summer light, is milled to make the bread that feeds the children of his enemy. Heroic, pointless, stupid, noble. But Jamie Falcon, the Earth's first true genius, was no longer above stupid and pointless. He was completely insane. Bates, the engineer, ran the console, capturing 64 simultaneous tracks and crying. The presence of Bates' tears was subsequently deduced by other engineers listening to the session. They say there is a presence suffusing the recording that doesn't derive from Jamie's playing, but seems instead to arise from Bates, a spectral luminosity, an echo of his pain's sensitivity to the unfolding event. They say one can hear his response to the call of Jamie's playing. One can feel his hands spider-walking across the controls on the recording console. They say definitively he was crying in the booth. The evidence lingers, a softly sobbing ghost in the machine. Whether or not he recorded his own tears, Bates did record Jamie's outpouring. A single fusion burst of madness, genius, vision, and despairing hope coalesced into paeans of utter desperation, futility, and ultimately self-annihilation. There are only 2 lines in Jamie's last song. The song lasts the length of one album, 35 and a half minutes. The music surges to elated heights that drop off into acute troughs of anguish. The song dives down in a totally pathetic misery, plunging into a Marianas trench of the soul, riding a blue bathyscaphe to where the bottom drops out from under the lowest depths of the ocean to reveal the rooftops of Hades. And from that desolate abyss, in the last seconds of the song, Jamie's voice cuts upward, rises as if tearing free in a last attempt to escape the pit into which he'd fallen. There is blood on the keys. From his fingers, mutilated in the ferocity of his attack on the instrument. He shouts out over a wildly hammering rhythmic discord, "You can run, cry, and moan till you're blue in the face, or dance till you're free of this damn human race." Now there are those who say, unkindly, that Jamie closed up shop because there wasn't anything left on the shelves. Clearly, these lines could have used some development. But these cards were dealt in a game called It Is What It Is. The music modulates to D-flat minor and quickly resolves on the scale's leading tone, D-flat, 3 below middle C, a one-note dirge that Jamie held as he gave Bates the signal to stop recording. The tune ends that abruptly. Bates reached out, shut down everything. It stops with instant and electric finality. Jamie Falcon backed away from his instrument, a man possessed who suddenly sees his demons cast out of his body and standing in front of him. He jumped up from the synthesizer, upsetting a pair of congas set on a chrome tripod stand behind him. They thundered to the floor as he ran across the room to the exit. In the hall, leading to the stairway, he stopped to write on the concrete block wall with blood from his fingertips, "Death dances." He dashed up the stairs and out the door above. The next and last performance of Jamie Falcon, the Earth's first true genius, took place on the roof of the studio, watched by a disappointingly small crowd of non-paying rodents and a magically large, frigid moon. Jamie strutted back and forth, 10 stories above the street, on the little wall that rimmed the edge of the flat-roof building. He sang a few words that no one wrote down, flashed a few of his signature dance moves, and dove neatly toward the sidewalk below. Bates was found, sitting in his chair, isolated in the recording booth with an ashtray full of stubbed-out cigarettes. He wore headphones. He had been listening to the recording, letting it loop endlessly. It hadn't needed mixing, so he just listened to it. He'd added these words to the studio log: recorded, album, artist, J. Falcon, engineer, none. It's not known how many times Bates listened to the song loop before he opened the drawer with his few supplies and pulled out a razor blade kept on hand for opening envelopes and laying out lines of cocaine. With clinically accurate incisions, he opened his veins, the veins of both wrists, and let his arms hang down at his sides. They could not tell how many times the song had looped past his deafened ears when they found him slumped in his chair, an odd island in the middle of a sticky pool of blood, nearly 6 hours after Jamie's dance had ended. The audio equipment hummed and sighed, a faint electric breeze, the sound almost soothing. Within a month, the album was released. It was a direct hit, a smash. It tore up the charts. It shot to the top. #1 with a bullet. And the dance caught on too.